Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. This video is about keeping track of time. Do you want to be a better dungeon master? Me too. Hi, William Tramp, also known as This Effin' GM here, and today I want to talk to you about tracking time in the Sandbox. Or any game really, but I'm making this video in the context of the Sandbox that I discussed in my previous video. If you have not seen that one yet, I would highly recommend watching it so that you understand the context of some of the items that I'm going to be touching on in this video. Or not, you do you, boo. In a sandbox, tracking time is a key component to making the adventure feel real and to making distance between locations meaningful. There are many types of adventures that tend to hand-wave this element, which is perfectly fine for the more story-based structures, but for me, a good sandbox is distinguished by having time as one of the many resources that players have at their disposal while exploring the great wide world. And truth be told, it is a resource in a sandbox, just as much as rations or ammunition are, especially when you start implementing factions, but that's going to be discussed in another video in this series. So how do I track time in my sandbox games? Well, I use a couple of different methods depending on the length of time that's needed to be tracked, and I'm going to go over each one. But before I do that, I want to give a quick shout out to Clean Procedures. I've spoken about Clean Procedures before, and if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend it. But in a nutshell, a clean procedure is a step-by-step process for the game master to be able to run a particular scenario structure in a consistent fashion. Tracking time in any capacity is heavily dependent on having a clean procedure, and all of my methods center around the implementation of procedures that make running time easier, more efficient, and, if I say so myself, more fun. Okay, so let's talk about how I track time. Alright, first I want to make a quick note on tracking time in combat. Combat typically has the shortest increment of time in most tabletop role-playing games, with Dungeons & Dragons centering around the 6-second round. I'm not going to go into any tips or tricks for running combat in the sandbox, as the general rules for your system of choice will tend to be the best. I do want to talk about tracking time in the dungeon. Now, when I say dungeon, I'm referring to any contained location with multiple spaces, like a castle, a spaceship, a cavern, or a dungeon, something like that. Most tabletop role-playing games tend to center the dungeon turn around 10-minute increments, and I use this measurement as well. But when I'm tracking time in the dungeon, I tend to steer away from standard methods of random encounter generation, all of which seem to be some sort of variation of, at the top of the hour, roll and see if there is a random encounter. It's predictable. I want more variability, more oomph in my random encounter generation, so I take a page from the Angry GM and I use a tension pool. This is Angry's book, by the way. The tension pool is discussed in his blog, which I put a link to in the thing below, but the book's pretty good too. Now, the basic idea of the tension pool is simple. At the start of every 10-minute turn, I take a 6-sided dice and I add it to a pool. In my case, it's a sweet skull cup, but any receptacle able to house some dice will work. The key part of this is that it needs to be in full view of the players. The players need to see that time is passing before their very eyes. When each turn begins, another 6-sided dice is added to the pool, up until the point to where there are 6 dice in the pool, or at the top of the hour. At the top of the hour, I clear the pool by rolling all the dice accumulated. If any of these dice show a face 1, it's time for a complication. Complications are basically random encounters, but with some added problems tossed in, like torches going out, rations being expended, whatever kind of acts as a thorn in their side. I guess any of these can be considered a random encounter. I just want to recommend not having everything just be slobbering monsters waiting for a taste of the players. I mean characters, we do not kill players. Check out this video for more on that. Now, once the pool is clear, it is empty, and I begin again, counting out the next hour. Now, you might have noticed that this seems to be the basically same as just rolling at the top of the hour, and it would be if this was the only way to use the pool. Sometimes on their turns, players have a habit of doing something a little silly, like, having loud arguments, or trying to break down doors with heavy hits, or, I don't know, maybe they start a laser light show with the cantrip prestidigitation, because for some reason Rodney thinks prestidigitation can literally do whatever he says it can do. It can't. It has limits, Rodney. You know what? I don't need to tell you. I'm sure you have a Rodney at your table. Anyway, when players take these potentially dangerous or attention-drawing actions, well, I roll the pool. Whatever dice are currently inside of my pool immediately get rolled, and I look for ones for complications. The difference in this case versus the top of the hour clearing is that I put these dice back into the pool. The pool is not emptied until the top of the hour when there are 6 dice in the pool. Now, quick note, if a combat occurs in a dungeon, the combat and the subsequent mop-up count as an entire dungeon turn. So I would add a dice after every combat. Now, I love using this method because when players can see and hear the passage of time, the tension starts to build. Knowing that a resource is ticking away lets them make decisions accordingly and fast. Because when they declare no actions and just chat it up for 10 minutes, well, I just add another dice to the pool and that was one of the turns. The game tends to play more fast-paced, and people tend to be more thoughtful of their actions as they have a visual and auditory reminder of time passing in the environment. Okay, from the dungeon, we move up to tracking time in the town. In town, I measure time in hours, using 1 or more hours to track what urban actions the players are taking while in a larger, more normal people congested area. For urban exploration, I have devised a system for my own games using a variant on the tension pool for tracking time. First, I divide the day out into 8-hour chunks. This is based on the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition 8-hour workday, but if your system of choice uses a different amount of expected adventuring time, you can certainly use whatever time is associated with that system. Now for me, 6 dice won't divide evenly into 8, and frankly, knowing that all potential complications will be rolled at the end of the day will tend to change the playstyle, so I advise clearing the pool after every 4 hours of urban exploration. Furthermore, I associate certain actions with exposure, meaning that anytime a player takes one of these particular urban actions, a complication roll is immediately made, although it doesn't clear the pool. Now, unlike dungeon crawling, which most role-playing systems have a defined set of actions for, I had to design my own, which I've written as a handout that I give to all of my players. I like to ensure that my players have a copy of these types of things, so they are aware of what the standard possibilities are during this time, because I firmly believe that anytime a new substructure is added to an existing system, especially one that involves player engagement, you need to make sure that the players are equipped so they can make informed decisions. This handout, as well as the rules by which I run urban exploration, are actually available for you to purchase on Ttrpg for $1. The link is in the thing below. In that product, you're going to find a list of common urban actions, a sample random complication table, and the rules for a brand new condition for D&D 5th edition that can be inflicted upon your unsuspecting players, ire. Alright, moving past my self-advertisement, and before we move on to the next way to track time, let's go ahead and get a word from our sponsor. Hi, it's me, William Tramp, also known as This Effin' GM, and I am the sponsor for whatever video you are currently watching. Did you know that I print, paint, and sell tabletop miniature terrain on Etsy? Well, if you didn't, now you do. On my Etsy store, which you can find a link to in the thing below, you can find a number of products that I make for your tabletop role-playing games, including modular dungeon and cave tiles. I make town buildings and a few other fun little things. Now, in fact, a lot of the items that you see behind me in my videos, they're just products that I offer in my store. With my products, I offer a variety of paint styles, I offer international shipping, free shipping for orders within the domestic United States for orders over $35, and discounts. In fact, I want to offer you a discount right now as a thank you for letting me pitch to you at this moment. Use the discount code ISAWYOURAD for 7% off your entire next order of $20 or more from my store. Fun fact, the link that I shared in the thing below already has that discount built in. And I'll let you know, my store is known for quick turnaround, high quality, reasonable prices, and fast communication. And not to brag, but as of today's recording, I have 130 5-star reviews that will attest to that. All right, I hope to see you there soon. Now, let's get you back to your regularly scheduled programming. Wow, that guy had a great mustache. Anyway, back to it. When we get to tracking time in the wild, specifically when crawling through the hexes in the sandbox, I take yet another note from The Dark of Hot Springs Island by Swordfish Islands, and I track time using 4-hour chunks that I call watches. Each day has a total of 6 watches. 2 to 3 of those watches are typically reserved for long rests, depending on if anyone is staying up to keep an eye out for danger. The next 1 to 2 watches are devoted to extras, like setting up camp, making preparations, and the occasional short rest throughout the day. This leaves the final 2 watches specifically reserved for the adventuring day. Now, of course, if a party wants to push it and risk exhaustion, or whatever mechanic you use for that, well, they can go right ahead. Now, watches can be spent traveling among the hexes or exploring a hex. Each time the players announce one of these actions, a watch is spent. You remember in my first video where I discussed making sure the hexes corresponded with the day's travel in your system of choice? This is where that's going to be pretty important. In my example, I suggested for D&D 5th edition using the 6-mile hex. Using the watch system, this means if the terrain is favorable, they can spend a watch traveling up to 2 hexes. Now, personally, I don't go into the whole, can I spend half a watch removing half the amount of hexes? If they travel, it's a watch. Now, if the terrain is unfavorable, every hex would count as 2 hexes for the purpose of distance, so 1 watch would then equal 1 hex. Anyway, in that previous video, I discussed the 3 things method of populating a hex. When a party enters a hex for the first time, they are given the first location for free just by virtue of entering the hex. If they choose to seek out other points of interest in that hex, well, that's going to cost them a watch. In a sandbox game, time passes, and it can pass quickly. Consider using some sort of visual indicator to keep track of how many watches a group is using in a given day. Jacob Hurst, the writer of Hot Springs Island, suggests using poker chips, but I also find that dice, coins, or even these sweet wooden coins made by my friend Andy work amazingly. Hey, thanks Andy. You should follow Andy on Twitter, by the way. He's great. Although this series is about using a sandbox, and we've only discussed creating a small map, someday you might find yourself with this massive sandbox populated with all kinds of hexes. Usually I recommend going day by day through the hex crawl portion, but eventually large swaths of that map may already be known to the player characters, and explaining what's in every single hex over and over and over again can get very tedious. For a mostly discovered sandbox map in which travel from one location to another may take days or even weeks to accomplish, I would like to highlight a practice introduced to me through Ian Publishing's Level Up A5e system in their GM reference book, Trials and Treasures. In this game, long-term travel is divided into regions rather than focusing on individual hexes. So, for example, if the player characters need to get across the Fields of Dread, through the Forest of Unkindness, and over the Mountains of Misdeeds to reach their intended destination, the Game Master would note that 3 regions were being traveled through. A Game Master would then take note of how long they'll spend in each region, assuming they travel straight through, calculate that amount of time, and then let the players know the journey length. Perhaps the player characters take certain special travel actions, but that's typically system dependent. After all that, the Game Master would calculate the amount of complications on the trip, rolling 1 complication or random encounter for each region the group travels through. Play out the encounters, and they arrive at the destination. I prefer this method strongly over hand-waving travel, which I firmly believe should never be done in a sandbox. But I also prefer this over rolling for individual hexes, as that can significantly bog down gameplay. Ugh. Finally, I want to talk about downtime. In some systems, downtime can be spent to improve character abilities, craft new and wondrous items, recover from horrible wounds, or just generally party away all of the player character's treasure. I think downtime can often be overlooked in home games, especially those games that are running pre-made adventures, because those often have a time limit on the course of events. But in a sandbox, the world typically should not be hurtling towards doom at a breakneck pace. For downtime, I tend to pass time week by week. Months and years can be used, but I personally think week by week is more manageable in terms of given actions that a player can take. If you don't believe me, try asking a wizard character what they do for 3 months of downtime, and I guarantee you could be handed a giant list of the 50 spell scrolls and 43 potions and 15 spells they researched during that time. Oh my goodness, if that's your thing, go for it. But for me, the humble week is a tried and true method. In downtime, I typically only seek complications if the location of the downtime is a particularly dangerous place, or as fodder to make the next excursion into the sandbox more interesting. On that note, during downtime, factions should keep moving and plotting forward with their schemes to keep the world more organic during this time. But again, we'll discuss that more in a future video. Now, rather than glossing over the downtime weeks, you could always take a note from fans of 1-1 time and consider letting the players run another group of adventures while the original team is taking a breather. If you want more information on 1-1 time, you should check out videos by my friends Harmony Ginger and Gelatinous Rube, which are listed in the thing below. Alright, and that's all I have to say about time. Wow, that video took a long time, I know. I started writing this script and I realized that I had so much to say about tracking time that I forgot to track the time that it would take to explain it all. You see what I did there? Tracking the time in a video about track. Okay. All right. I want to thank you for making it this far. Talking about tracking time can be kind of boring for some, but I personally find it extremely important when running an open world sandbox. I look forward to showing you the next video where I'm going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of what I believe makes a great starting town for your sandbox. Until then, I hope you have a great day. I hope you like and subscribe to my channel if you're so inclined, and I hope to see you soon.